Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lode-Holt. This week we are looking at some of the small books at the back of the Old Testament, and in particular at the last 5. These are some of the minor prophets, but we need to remember that while they are minor in length compared to prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, they are not minor in message. That might well be said about Zechariah. The first thing to note about Zechariah is that he was a contemporary of Haggai, whom we looked at yesterday. Like Haggai, he was greatly concerned that the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem be completed, and like Haggai, saw that this would usher in the Messianic age. In other words, God's Messiah would come, and the world would be made right. More than Haggai, Zechariah's vision was apocalyptic. He was looking for that dramatic change God would bring about in the new age. Zechariah presents his prophetic visions in a unique way. His prophecies are described in night visions of a dialogue between God, Zechariah, and an interpreting angel. After that, things get a little more complex. You see, almost all scholars believe that the book of Zechariah was written by 2 different people. They are called 1st Zechariah and 2nd Zechariah. 1st Zechariah wrote the first 8 chapters of the book, and they focus on that rebuilding of the temple and calling the people to faith. 2nd Zechariah begins in chapter 9 and turns more apocalyptic, looking for God's new age to come. And most scholars believe this part was written when the Greeks were ruling Palestine a few hundred years later. 2nd Zechariah is even more interesting to read. In 2nd Zechariah, we find images of a Messiah who is the Prince of Peace and a good shepherd who is smitten on behalf of the flock of Israel. Does that sound familiar? It ought to. In fact, in speaking about Jesus, New Testament writers quote from Zechariah more than any other Old Testament book except for Isaiah. As a whole, Zechariah speaks of God's plans to live with and among God's people. May we now and always find God among us. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.